This method to beings conducted by the initiator himself of the, so to say, new investigations. His name was Aziman, and he was a member of a group of contemporary Asiatic three-brained beings who, having cognized their slavish dependence upon certain causes within themselves, organized a collective existence for the purpose of working upon themselves to deliver themselves from this inner slavery. It is interesting to notice that this group of contemporary terrestrial three-brained beings, one of whom was this brother Aziman, had previously existed in the country formerly Pearl Land, now called Hindustan. But afterwards, when beings from the continent of Europe appeared there and began disturbing them and hindering their peaceful work, they all migrated across what are now called there the Himalayan mountains, and settled partly in the country Tibet, and partly in what are called the valleys of the Hindu Kush. Brother Aziman was one of those who settled in the valleys of the Hindu Kush. As time was precious to the members of this brotherhood who were working for their self-perfection, and the process of eating robbed them of a great deal of time, this brother Aziman, being very well versed in the science then called alchemy, began working very earnestly in the hope of finding what is called a chemical preparation, on the introduction of which into himself a being could exist without spending so much time in the preparation and consumption of all kinds of products for his first food. After long and intensive work, Brother Aziman found for this purpose a combination of chemical substances in the form of a powder, one small thimbleful of which, introduced into a being once in every 24 hours, made it possible for him both to exist without consuming anything else except water as food, and to perform all his being obligations without injury. When I chanced to visit this monastery where Brother Aziman existed, with the other brethren of the said small group of your contemporary favorites, this preparation had already been used by all the brethren for 5 months, and Brother Aziman, with the participation of others of the brethren who were also very familiar with this question, was intensively busy with elucidatory experiments on a large scale. And these same experiments showed them that this preparation could not ultimately suffice for normal being existence. After this constatation of theirs, they not only entirely ceased the use of this preparation, but even destroyed the very formula for preparing it, which Brother Aziman had found. Several months later, I again happened to come upon that monastery and acquainted myself personally with the document of these brethren which had been composed by them on the day when they finally ceased the use of this indeed astonishing preparation. This document contained, among other things, several very interesting details about the action of this said preparation of Aziman. It was stated that when this preparation was introduced into the presence of a being, it had, besides its nourishing property, a particular action upon what are called the wandering nerves of the stomach, from which action not only did the need for food immediately cease in beings, but furthermore, every desire to introduce into oneself any other edible product whatsoever entirely disappeared. And if something should be forcibly introduced, it took a long time before the disagreeable sensation and state thus provoked would pass. It was also stated that, at the outset, no change was noticed in the presence of beings who fed on this preparation. Even their weight did not diminish. Only after 5 months did its harmful effect begin to be evident in the common presence of a being in the gradual weakened functioning of certain perceptive organs, and of the manifestations of their, so to say, ableness and sensitiveness. For example, their voices would grow weaker, and their sight, hearing, and so on worse. Furthermore, in several of them from the beginning of the derangement of these being functions, changes were observed in their common psychic state. In the document composed by these brethren, there were, among other things, a lengthy description of the changes in the character of beings after 5 months' use of this remarkable preparation of Aziman. And in illustration, some very excellent and apt comparisons were given. Although the examples themselves which were given for comparison in this document have not remained in my memory, yet, thanks to the, so to say, flavor of them which I have retained, I shall be able to give you their purport if I use the language of our respected Mullah Nasr ad-Din. For example, an ordinary good fellow with a character of, as they say, one of God's angels, suddenly became as irritable as those of whom our dear Mullah Nasr ad-Din once said, "He is as irritable as a man who has just undergone full treatment by a famous European nerve specialist." Or again, beings who one day had been as pacific as the little butter lambs which the pious place on the festal table at their most important religious feasts, would on the next day get as exasperated as a German professor when some Frenchman, also a professor, discovers something new in contemporary science. Or again, a being whose love resembled that of a contemporary terrestrial suitor for a rich widow, of course before he has received a single penny from her, would turn just as spiteful as one of those malicious persons who, foaming at the mouth, will hate that poor author who is now writing about you and me in his work entitled An Objectively Impartial Criticism of the Life of Man. This poor upstart author, by the way, will be hated both by the full-bodied materialists and by the 96-carat deists, and even by those of the three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, who, when their stomachs are full and their mistresses are for the moment making no scenes, are incorrigible optimists, but who, quite the contrary, when their stomachs are empty, are hopeless pessimists. Now, my boy, that we have mentioned this queer upstart writer, there is nothing for it but to inform you here of a certain perplexity which already long ago arose in me in regard to him, and which has progressively increased, and that is concerning a naivety of his. I must explain that from the very beginning of his responsible existence, he also became, whether by accident or by the will of fate I do not know, a follower, and in fact a very devout follower of our wise and esteemed Mullah Nasr ad-Din. And furthermore, in the ordinary process of his being existence, he has never lost the smallest opportunity to act entirely according to Mullah Nasr ad-Din's unprecedentedly wise and inimitable sayings. And now, according to the information which has reached me by etherogram, all of a sudden he appears to be constantly acting contrary to one of the very serious and exceptionally practical counsels, certainly not accessible